October 1858, unfolded beneath a harvest, moon cast in cold silver, its light seeping through ragged branches and bending tobacco stalks in the humid North Carolina night. Benjamin's hands worked the earth with a slow, deliberate rhythm, the calluses thickened by years beneath relentless sun and cruelty. Each breath drew in the pungent scent of ripe tobacco leaves, mixed with the faint copper tang of dried blood, echoes of past lashes and bruises that whispered from skin to bone. His gaze drifted toward the shadowed quarters behind the plantation house, where murmurs slipped like smoke among the cabins. Something unspoken stirred the air, a quiet defiance as taut as the nerves beneath his weathered skin. What truths lay buried beneath the tobacco's heavy scent? What shape did the night's longings take, hidden in whispered breath? Few knew the weight Benjamin carried, silent remembrance etched in the textures of his worn shirt, the steady, restrained tension of fingers clutching a simple sickle. Memories pressed in like the pressing damp of the earth after harvest rains, the sting of cruel overseers' hands planted deep in flesh, the faces of kin lost to enforced distance or worse. The moon hung full and watchful, casting pools of faint light that scattered across the fields as if to mark where shadows faded and dangers crept. Nearby, a loose hinge creaked as a cabin door moved slightly. A soft sound swallowed beneath the groan of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. Accounts suggest that under this same moon, years before, a young man's defiance first fractured the quiet order. Could the night bear witness once again? A plan shimmered in silence, fragile yet resolute, poised to ignite beneath the ominous glow. Within the quarters, muted whispers clung to the drafty wood and sagging tin roofs. Benjamin's slow, measured breaths mingled with those of comrades, their voices cautious as the rustle of tobacco leaves outside. Their bodies were marked by the plantation's grim ledger, whippings counted in scars, stolen days pressed into twisted hours of survival. Overseers' rules hung cruel and certain, codified by slave codes that claimed authority with iron fists. The sickle, usually a tool of harvest, now gleamed cold where it lay sharpened against wood, a silent promise oscillating between desperation and justice. The night thickened with tension, a delicate balance between hope and peril, as each figure prepared for a reckoning the wider world would seek to erase. How does a soul decide when to cross from endurance to rebellion? Benjamin's eyes flicked briefly toward the distant manor house, where dim lights mocked with their cold order, untouched by the harvest season's toil. He tightened his grip around the curved handle, feeling the rough grain bite into his palm, a tether to both earth and fate. The weight of years pressed upon him, not only the lash, but the loss of family, names forgotten in plantation records, buried like seeds deep beneath moldering soil. As moonlight bled across the fields, the air thickened with unshed tears and unheard prayers, the soft rocking of an old cradle's cloth, dragging faintly in the breeze. Records imply that these stolen moments of quiet yielded to restless thoughts. The weight of silence soon became unbearable. What would happen when whispered resistance found form in blood and steel? The night's fragile calm shattered without warning. A sudden sharp intake of breath, the abrupt sound of hurried footsteps, and then the sickle's arc, swift, merciless. Benjamin's first strike marked a threshold. The harvest moon bore witness to 6 overseers felled in quick succession, their cries swallowed by the whispering night. Each blow was a muted echo of stolen dignity, a plea voiced in the language of flesh and iron. The cool sweep of sickle against bone spoke of desperation rather than fury, a reckoning not sought but forced upon a man who had nothing left to lose. The field stood silent, but charged, heavy with the scent of disturbed earth and change. What fragility held the next moments in balance? Would the uprising be whispered into oblivion or roar into history? As darkness reclaimed the sky, Benjamin stood alone among swaying stalks, breath ragged and heart pounding like a distant drum. Fingers slick with sweat traced the shape of the sickle, the blade's cold kiss, a stark reminder of the night's irreversible passage. The moon hung low, a silent sentinel bathing the tobacco in its mournful light. The cry of a distant scream pierced the stillness, hinting at the dark consequences to come. The air carried a breath of inevitability. The harvest moon had long cast its ominous glow over secrets now splintered into dawn. Would the world remember a man who dared to wield a tool of subjugation into an emblem of revolt? Or would Benjamin's name fade into the tobacco's rustle, lost beneath layers of ash and silence? Under the iron regime imposed by overseers, the plantation was a realm of rigid cruelty and systematic control. Overseers moved like dark specters among the tobacco rows, their boots stirring dry dust and broken leaves beneath heavy brows. Their cruel protocol was relentless, the raising of whips that cracked like thunder, the jargon of orders barked sharp and fast, and the detailed record-keeping that sealed fates. Overseers stood as grim arbiters of punishment, meting out lashings under the cold gaze of the law, which granted them unchecked authority. Each overseer's command bore the weight of laws crafted to maintain a delicate, violent balance, slave codes that reshaped human lives into property, stripped of voice and autonomy. What system allowed such a brutal hierarchy to persist with such silent consent? The plantation's barn held a dual purpose, both sanctuary and stage for the violent cycles beneath. Against its weathered beams hung farm tools, gleaming faintly by candlelight, especially the sickle, its curved blade sharpened to a dangerous edge. Normally an implement for harvest, its shape was now a silent talisman of revolt, its arc both fruitful and fatal. Benjamin's eyes often lingered on it, tracing its cold, hard lines as if seeking strength or extracting an unspoken promise. Each overseer's glance met this tool with disdain or caution, unaware of the quiet storm gathering behind clenched jaws and furtive whispers. How often did an object once vital for life become a harbinger of death in a world turned upside down? Accounts suggest the overseer's protocol grew harsher. With each passing day, a tightening grip fueled by whispers of unrest. Overseers sharpened their vigilance along with their weapons, forcing slaves into grueling hours beneath the relentless sun and cold night wind. Punishments multiplied beyond mere floggings. Suspensions in stocks, forced marches through mud, and ration reductions wore away bodies and spirits alike. Overseers remembered every slight, real or imagined, and punishment followed swiftly. Benjamin walked this brutal landscape under a cloud of watchful eyes and severed hopes. His silent rage pressed down like the rough wool of his coarse shirt against bruised skin. What was the breaking point when suffering shifted into revolt? In the flicker of lamplight, the overseers convened in hushed council, plotting tighter rules and faster retribution. Their voices were low and harsh, their words laced with fear disguised as authority. Farmhands versed in cruelty and order measured out threats like currency, dividing trust and suspicion with razor edges. These men were both tools and tyrants, products of a system demanding absolute obedience from some and total submission from others. Their shadows stretched long over the quarters, swallowing murmurs of rebellion beneath iron boots and calloused hands. The sickle hung on the barn wall, cold and silent, while outside the tobacco leaves rustled, carrying secrets on the night wind. How far would a man pushed beyond endurance go to reclaim himself? One night, as overseers paced the grounds sharpening their resolve, Benjamin found himself gripping that sickle, the rough wood handle biting into his palm. The weapon promised escape, but also irrevocable change. His breath steadied with purpose. Every nerve coiled, tension thick as the tobacco's musty odor. Rigid laws bent under the weight of the moment, and the old rules held no shelter against a fury inching toward eruption. The overseers would not know the hour until it shattered. In the silence before upheaval, the sickle gleamed under the harvest moon, a stark emblem of a terrible choice realized. The question lingered in the cold night air. When does survival demand sacrifice? The harvest moon bore witness to a night that tore through the fragile order of the plantation's dark heart. Benjamin's sickle fell swift and sure, severing not just flesh, but the illusion of control so fiercely guarded by the 6 overseers. The first strike was a sudden rupture, metal biting into sinew, the crack of impact leaving the air thick with shocked silence and hurried breaths. Panic rippled like a sudden storm, conversations halted mid-sentence, and eyes widened with disbelief. No one could claim surprise, yet the speed and ferocity defied expectation. The sickle, once a tool of cultivation, now sang a deadly, discordant note. How could a single night unravel years of enforced silence and fear? Benjamin moved through the tobacco fields, like a shadow closer to midnight, breath ragged but measured. Each fallen overseer marked a step into irrevocable defiance. His hands, roughened by toil and bracing against the blade's weight, trembled with a strange mixture of solemn purpose and rising desperation. The night air held the bitter tang of disturbed earth and fresh rain, the scent of upheaval itself. Around him, other enslaved figures, aided by whispered plans and long-strangled rage, joined the turbulent flight, their movements blending with the rustle of leaves and the faint crackle of dry stalks underfoot. The fields became a twisting maze, both refuge and trap, cradling their desperate escape beneath a watching moon. Would freedom ever be more than a flicker beyond the tobacco's grasp? Chaos reigned in fractured bursts. Overseers fallen startled, the night's grim routine, their commands dissolved into gasps and stifled cries. The plantation's balance, so carefully maintained by cruelty and fear, shattered in the harsh echo of steel on bone. The sickle swung again and again, as if nature itself had turned against tyranny, and each blow struck with sorrowful finality, a tribute to stolen dignity and fractured kinship. The cries that once accompanied lashes transformed into a haunting silence, broken only by retreating footsteps and the swift beating of anxious hearts. Benjamin's breath labored as adrenaline ebbed, the cold of the harvest night seeping in like ash, settling after a firestorm. What price does justice demand when paid in blood? This flight was no mere scramble. It was a protest carved in shadow and resolve. The tobacco fields laid thick with night's damp hush, sound muted, except for the snap of a twig or a sharp intake of breath. The sickle's cold weight lingered in Benjamin's grasp, a symbol now heavier than any yoke. His pulse thrummed against the chill night air, a rhythmic tattoo of survival's raw urgency. The moon's pale light was their only guide, casting fleeting silver patterns that danced between stalks like ghosts of futures not yet realized. In these fragile moments, time collapsed, stretching every heartbeat into eternity as the hunted and hunter blurred into a single urgent silhouette. If escape was a dream, how swiftly must it shatter? Behind them, the plantation's walls of order groaned and trembled, an empire cracking beneath the pressure of a truth long denied. What stories would the wind carry beyond the tobacco fields? What legends would root themselves in the dirt where 6 overseers fell like broken pillars? And as Benjamin vanished beneath the harvest moon's solemn gaze, one question lingered with a chill sharper than any blade: could rebellion sown in blood ever harvest justice without losing itself in shadow? The night's violence left the plantation heavy with a silence more profound than the absence of overseers. Their harsh protocols, once the steady drumbeat of control, had been fractured irrevocably. In the aftermath, the remaining overseers and the plantation owner's family grappled with a terror that seeped into every creaking board and drafty corner. The system they relied upon, the cold ledger lines of slave codes and merciless enforcement, now appeared fragile, vulnerable to the explosive rage of the oppressed. This was no mere disruption. It was a seismic fracture, challenging the very foundation of plantation order. How would the fragile authority reclaim its grip when terror had already sown doubt? Conversations behind closed doors spoke in hushed tones of punitive retribution and rigid control. The overseers, though fewer in number, vowed swift justice governed by laws as cold and unyielding as the iron chains they wielded. Plantation owners discussed the economy lost with each deceased overseer, the harvest imperiled, the commerce at risk. The sickle, once a tool of harvest, became a grim symbol of shattered peace and looming vengeance. In these moments, the plantation was as much battleground as home, its dark heart pulsating with fear and defiance alike. How did the laws meant to suppress rebellion sometimes fuel the fires of resistance? Tightening their grip, authorities summoned militias from neighboring counties, their heavy boots stirring dust and dread through fields already stained with fear. As soldiers encroached, overseers sharpened punishments. Flogging, stocks, and forced labor became weapons designed to intimidate and fracture any flicker of insurrection. Records imply that free black people were scrutinized with suspicion, their rights clipped further as paranoia sharpened like a blade. The plantation's residents, enslaved people and overseers alike, found themselves trapped in a tightening spiral of control and terror. The sickle's cold gleam, a reminder of revolt's cost. Could severity stem the tide once liberty's shadow had passed? Amid the mounting panic, oral histories whispered among the enslaved carried Benjamin's name like a refrain, part warning, part legend. His revolt was lionized in secret songs and mourned as a bitter sacrifice. Official archives tried to erase his act, filing it away as mere criminal violence, but the stories persisted, woven like threads through the tobacco's rustle. The plantation became a crucible where memory and erasure clashed, a contest between power and resilience shielded by the harvest moon's watchful eye. Would the truth ever break free from the shadows cast by law and camera? Benjamin's revolt echoed beyond the fields, forcing a reckoning not only with the plantation's brutality, but also with the legal and social structures that sustained it. The rebellion's aftermath revealed a moral dilemma, tangled in laws written to enforce submission, yet too brittle to contain human will. The sickle's arc had cut far deeper than flesh. It cleaved through the plantation's carefully constructed order, marking a turning point whose ripples defied containment. How long could such a fragile peace endure, when carved in the stark lines of violence and fractured justice? The harvest moon faded into dawn, but its cold, spectral glow lingered, a haunting reminder of revolt, sacrifice, and the price of shattered silence. In the tobacco fields, the sickle lay abandoned, its blade dulled but its symbolism sharpened to a jagged edge. The shadows lengthened, folding history into layers of memory, legend, and law. As the world outside moved on, the plantation bore the scars of a night when fruit became weapon, and desperation carved a fleeting bid for freedom beneath the watchful eye of autumn's mournful light. Beneath the heavy cloak of night, Benjamin's strike shattered more than flesh. It shattered the rigid, cruel protocols that held the plantation in its merciless grip. Overseers, once confident in their dominion, found their world fractured by an uprising swift and merciless. The 6 lives lost sent ripples of terror through the ordered world, unsettling the carefully maintained balance between tormentor and tormented. Their punishment had always been swift, their authority absolute, a cold ledger written in scars and submission. Yet here, beneath the harvest moon's pale gaze, that authority hung by a thread, fraying into fear and doubt. How could a single night unravel decades of brutal control? As dawn bled into the tobacco fields, panic gripped the plantation. Whispers of retribution stirred like dry leaves caught in a sudden wind. The overseers left alive, their faces etched with disbelief and rising dread, summoned militias from nearby counties, muscled to reinforce collapsing order. Their heavy boots tore through the fields, scattering dust and dread together in the humid air. Punishments sharpened in cruelty, lashings, stalks, and forced labor multiplied to serve as fierce warnings. Black bodies were scrutinized with growing suspicion. The fine threads of freedom clipped further as paranoia deepened. The night's fire ignited a harsh crackdown designed to extinguish hope. Could such terror ever truly silence the restless spirit of rebellion? Amidst the gathering storm, the plantation's enslaved whispered Benjamin's name with a mixture of awe and mourning. His act transformed into legend. The sickle as both weapon and symbol, a silent song in the quarters and fields. The plantation's shaken core forced a reckoning beyond its boundaries. Laws tightened across the South. Slave codes extended their iron grasp to snuff out any flicker of dissent. The sickle's arc, sharp and swift, became the fulcrum on which entire systems pivoted. When violence aimed to sever chains, it also severed the fragile peace crafted by centuries of subjugation. The aftermath exposed a bitter paradox. In aiming to contain rebellion, the system only exposed its own rot. How long could such a brittle order endure, carved in stark lines of cruelty and fractured justice? As the harvest moon waned and dawn's gray fingers crept across the fields, the sickle lay silent, its blade stained but its symbol sharpened. The tobacco, damp with morning dew, whispered secrets of revolt and sacrifice, of a night when the tool of survival became the instrument of rebellion. Shadows lengthened over history's canvas, layers of memory, erasure, law, and legend, folding into one another beneath the fading light. The question lingered like a final breath. When will justice emerge fully from the harvest moon's long, cold shadow? On the plantation, Benjamin's world was shaped by the long shadow of tobacco's unforgiving demands. The tobacco plant, with its large, waxy leaves and heady scent, was both the lifeblood and the burden of the southern economy. Each stalk required constant care, stripping, curing, and packing, tasks that condemned enslaved men and women to ceaseless labor beneath sunlit skies and a merciless overseer's watch. Tobacco cultivation demanded a rhythm as unyielding as the law itself, work from dawn's first light until stars crowned the night. The rough burlap of drying leaves scraped against fingers, the heavy scent of curing tobacco weighed thick on the plantation air like a permanent shroud. What toll did this relentless cycle exact on those whose hands made wealth for others? In 1858, the tobacco plantation was a crucible of human endurance, punishment, and resistance. Overseers prowled fields like predators, their tools, whips, and loaded commands, ready to strike at the first hint of defiance. The sickle, vital for cutting tobacco stalks, carried an ambivalent symbolism. It was an instrument of both survival and subjugation, its curved blade slicing the plant as well as the will of those forced to wield it. Behind the labor, the tobacco economy fed a brutal feedback loop. Slave labor bred profit, which bred more slaves and deeper control. Records imply this merciless cycle grounded the South's wealth in chains as much as soil. How did the weight of this economy press on Benjamin's thoughts as he moved through rows of rustling leaves? The plantation's material culture spoke of a world engineered to keep bodies bound and spirits subdued. Clothes hung heavy with sweat and dust. Tools were extensions of authority or instruments of rebellion. The smell of lamp oil and cured tobacco permeated the quarters, mingling with the faint metallic tang of overseers' threats. Punishments found their form in the sharp sting of whip cords, the clanking iron of shackles, and the harsh cold of punishment stocks. Medicine offered to slaves was grudging, tinged with neglect. Herbs applied with soot-stained hands or salves, barely masking the infections from blows and hard labor. This was a world where body and soul fought a daily, grinding war. Would the sickle, already stained by survival, become a quieter herald of revolt? The plantation's seasonal cycles added a spectral layer to labor and oppression. Harvest moon nights, heavy with the scent of ripening tobacco and dry earth, cast eerie silver shadows that shifted with the wind. Nights were punctuated by the soft pulse of crickets and the distant hoot of owls, sounds mingled with whispered prayers and furtive movements in the quarters. These nights held an abandoned stillness, wrapped in tension, a world poised between imposed silence and the simmering desire for freedom. Beneath this harvest moon, Benjamin's revolt found its spark, weaponizing the sickle with a fury born from years of suffering. What fate awaited those who dared disturb the seasonal rhythm of toil and control? In this crucible, work and rebellion were inseparable elements carved into the plantation's fabric. The tobacco fields were both prison and stage, where the sickle sliced through leaves and the air wielded first for harvest, then for vengeance. Each step Benjamin took was marked by the texture of coarse cloth, the scrape of leather, and the cold bite of metal, the tangible realities grounding his resolve. The plantation thrummed with the weight of suppressed stories. Every leaf and shadow held a fractured echo of resistance. As the tobacco rustled softly in the night breeze, the preacher's words and overseer's threats dissolved beneath the sickle's arc. How many more stories waited buried in the tobacco's swaying fields? The plantation's dark heart beat strongest in its tobacco fields, where labor was dispersed across acres yet bound by unyielding chains. Here, the tobacco plant's opulent leaves whispered of wealth, but bore the weight of endless toil. enslaved bodies bent beneath scorching suns and chill dawn mists, plucking the fragile stalks with hands roughened and raw. The tobacco was more than a crop. It was a currency of power, a crop so demanding and land-consumptive that it shaped lives and landscapes alike. Coarse burlap sacks, heavy with the earthy scent of cured leaves, were both livelihood and shackles. In this vast expanse, the plantation cast long shadows, etched in sweat, scars, and silent endurance. What stories did the rustling leaves conceal beneath their glossy green? Tobacco cultivation required distinctive skills and rhythms, not merely brute strength but careful hands and constant vigilance. Overseers, eyes sharp and voices harsh, enforced this unrelenting schedule with precision born of fear and greed. The sickle, a curved blade designed to prune and harvest, symbolized the duality of life and labor here. Each cut severed a stalk destined for distant markets. Each sickle's edge gleamed with the promise of continued control. Enslaved workers learned to navigate this complex terrain, balancing duty with small acts of defiance, hidden songs, stolen moments of rest, fleeting glances exchanged beneath the tobacco canopy. The plantation's very structure enforced a brutal economy of control, but the tobacco leaves bore witness to a parallel world of resistance and resilience. Could the slow rustle of leaves become a chorus of revolt? The material culture of the plantation revealed an ecosystem of power, designed to bind bodies and spirits alike. Clothing was coarse and patchworked, woven from rough homespun cotton that chafed skin already marked by hardship. Tools, whips, shackles, and sickles hung like silent sentinels in barns and outbuildings, their cold iron surfaces catching the amber glow of lamp oil. The scent of curing tobacco perfumed the air, mingling with the acrid tang of sweat and the haunting odors of injury and neglect. Medicine was sparse and often harsh, a spray of bitter herbs or a grime-streaked poultice smeared hurriedly on broken flesh. In this world, every sense was pressed into the service of survival. Every tactile encounter a reminder of captivation and contested agency. How did Benjamin's worn hands hold hope amid such weight? The seasonal rhythms, with the harvest moon's cool light casting thin shadows over endless fields, set the pace of life and unrest. Nights were alive with subtle sounds, the quiet rustle of dried leaves, distant owl calls, whispered prayers carried softly on the breeze. For those enslaved, these hours held a precarious balance between exhaustion and careful vigilance. Beneath this harvest moon, the sickle's curved silhouette became a symbol not only of harvest, but of uprising and irrevocable change. The fields, bathed in silver light, carried the echoes of promises and threats, of lives tethered to the soil and yet yearning for flight. In the texture of bark, leaf, and soil, rebellion found its first fragile roots. Would it bloom beyond this night, or remain buried beneath the muted breath of the tobacco? The plantation preacher's voice cut through the thick evening air, swelling amid the tobacco leaves like a lament carried on the wind. His words, drawn from sacred texts, urged obedience and patience, weaving a complex sermon that echoed both submission and veiled hope. His presence was a paradox, part enforcer of the oppressive social order, part reluctant mourner of a people bound by chains and storms of suffering. The preacher's worn Bible bore marks of countless hands, its well-thumbed pages stained with sweat and soot, a fragile tether holding faith and fear in uneasy balance. What truths hid behind the cadence of his sermon, and what silent prayers stirred beneath his voice? As the congregation gathered quietly, their bodies cloaked in work-ragged clothes and weary resolve, the preacher spoke of justice not as earthly reprisal, but divine reckoning. His words offered a fragile shield, a way to find meaning in pain without transgression. Yet beneath the reverence was an undercurrent, a tension between scriptural obedience and the undeniable thirst for freedom that lay coiled in each heart. The preacher knew the line to tread was razor thin, for any sign of defiance could bring swift, brutal punishment. His gaze swept the faces alight with flickering candlelight. Men and women whose spirits endured beneath the weight of chains, but whose minds dreamed of escape. Would faith alone suffice when the sickle arced toward revolt? The plantation's social order folded subtly into the preacher's sermons, reinforcing the duality of control and hope. Law and gospel intertwined, crafting a narrative where rebellion was sin and submission salvation. Yet, the preacher's pauses betrayed deeper conflict. His voice wavered at the mention of justice, betraying awareness of the moral dilemmas, suffusing the air. Beneath his measured tones lay an unspoken question: could divine justice reconcile a world shattered by human cruelty? The congregants listened, not only to receive, but to resist quietly, their nods a tentative affirmation of both submission and survival. How did such sermons shape or shatter the fragile will to persevere or revolt? Outside, the night wrapped the quarters in deep shadow, punctuated only by the soft rustling of tobacco leaves, stirred by a faint breeze. Inside the small wooden church, the preacher's voice became a vessel for memory and coded rebellion, a delicate balance of comfort and warning. The flicker of candlelight revealed calloused hands, folded in prayer, and eyes glistening with unshed tears. Under the harvest moon's fading glow, his sermon crystallized the moral ambiguity faced by those enslaved, a world where hope was often tempered by harsh reality. What price must be paid for faith in a God who watched silently as the sickle cut through flesh and history? The preacher's sermon closed as it began softly, lingering like a whispered breath in the cool night. His final words bent toward a promise of reckoning beyond mortal eyes, a hope that somewhere beyond the fields of tobacco and chains, justice awaited. Yet, as congregants filed into the darkened quarters, their shadows lengthened with the weight of unspoken fears and quiet resolve. The sickle's arc had shattered silence, and order. The preacher's message now carried the weight of an uneasy peace. Would the next harvest moon find fields tamed, or would the sickle's legacy grow sharper still in the rustling tobacco? The rigid social hierarchy defining the tobacco plantation was as meticulously cultivated as the crop itself, a system designed to sustain a fierce economy founded on human bondage. At the summit stood the planter class, the owners of vast estates and dozens of enslaved people, wielding immense wealth and political influence. These men, often born into privilege or wealth accumulated by forced labor, were the unyielding architects of the plantation's brutal order. Beneath them, overseers acted as extensions of their will, charged with the direct management and often the violent enforcement of labor. Their leather boots beat the dirt paths between tobacco rows. Their voices barked commands sharpened by fear and greed. How did this structure maintain control over so many lives forged in hardship? Planters saw themselves as gentlemen of both land and legacy, defenders of a system they deemed natural, even divinely ordained. The planter's mansion, white-pillared, framed by magnolia trees, was a stark contrast to the cramped, weather-beaten quarters housing the enslaved. This physical division underscored a social chasm cemented by race, power, and economy. The planter's wealth was inextricably tied to the labor of enslaved men and women who toiled endlessly beneath the blistering sun, their lives measured in harvest cycles and overseers' lash. The plantation store, often the sole source for food and supplies for enslaved workers, tethered them further into cycles of debt and control. Did this architectural arrangement reflect only economic efficiency or a deliberate reinforcement of subjugation? The tobacco economy itself demanded a harsh logic. Tobacco cultivation was labor-intensive and unforgiving, each season bound to cycles of planting, tending, harvesting, and curing, each requiring precise timing and grueling effort. Slave labor was not just exploited, it was commodified and controlled via contracts, punishments, and constructed social norms. The planter class depended on laws and social codes that stripped enslaved people of legal personhood, enforcing obedience while carefully masking the system's inherent brutality. This hierarchy infused daily life with fear and submission, yet it also fostered an unstable tension between power and resistance. What cracks formed beneath the surface of such a tightly managed society? In the fields and quarters, enslaved people carved out spaces of resilience amidst oppression. Their communities, kinship networks, and oral traditions clung fiercely to life, memory, and hope. Secrets passed down through whispered stories, like that of Benjamin's Revolt, wove threads of rebellion beneath imposed silence. Cultural practices, coded songs, and subtle acts of defiance threaded through the daily grind, standing as quiet counterweights to overseer dominance. The tobacco fields, while instruments of control, also bore witness to this hidden world, where the sickle was at once a tool of labor and a symbol of rupture. Did the social hierarchies enforce only order, or did they also inadvertently nurture seeds of insurgency? The plantation's social order was a delicate edifice propped up by violence and ritual, sustained by beliefs that rationalized inequality as natural. Yet the very foundation of this model, the forced labor of enslaved people, contained the potential for its undoing. The complex interplay of domination, control, and suppressed humanity set the stage for rebellions like Benjamin's, a stark testament to resilience confronting systemic oppression. In this tightly woven fabric of power and subjugation, the rustling tobacco leaves whispered of both compliance and defiance, bearing witness to a society on the edge of transformation. The violence of the night unfolded with relentless speed, Benjamin's sickle flashing beneath the harvest moon like a silver arc of justice and fury entwined. The first overseer fell with a startled gasp, the sickle's edge biting through muscle and sinew, a grim punctuation to years of suffering. Shock rippled through those who bore witness. No one dared cry out as steel met flesh again and again. The moon cast long shadows of fallen bodies among the tobacco stalks, leaves whispering over violent echoes long after the cries died away. The sickle was no longer just a tool, it was a marker of shattered silence and swift, irrevocable rebellion. Benjamin's breath came heavy, pulling in the cool night air mixed with earth and dust, his heartbeat thrumming a fierce pulse beneath the sudden roar of uprising. His hands gripped the cold, curved blade with a mixture of desperation and grim resolve. Around him, others moved, silent shadows, stepping into the night's fractured order. They wove through the tobacco fields with frantic urgency, their footsteps muffled by long rows of leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. The harvest moon painted their flight with spectral light, turning the crops into a shifting labyrinth of escape and peril. Was this desperate flight the fragile hope of freedom, or the first step toward destruction? Behind them, the plantation's structured tyranny wavered and faltered. Overseers who once commanded with confidence struggled to grasp the swift collapse of control, their cries drowned by panic and the rustle of disturbed tobacco. The plantation, a cradle of enforced submission, became a battlefield where power shifted in violent bursts. Each fallen overseer marked a rupture in the system, a fracture in a facade built on fear and brutal enforcement. The sickle's edge was a harrowing echo of stolen dignity, a weapon shaped by years of silent endurance, giving voice in the night. How would the plantation reckon with this sudden fracture in its foundation? As the insurrection took form, panic spread swiftly. The night swallowed the sounds of battle, but whispers of revolt rose among the enslaved quarters, a chorus mingled with hope and dread. Benjamin's act was simultaneously a cry of vengeance and a plea for liberation, a violent cipher woven into the plantation's history. The sickle gleamed as a symbol of both survival and defiance, its cold curve telling a story of lives bound by chains but not conquered. That night, the tobacco fields bore witness not only to bloodshed, but to the enduring spirit of resistance rooted deep in earth and memory. Would the legacy of this revolt ever break the silence imposed by history's shadow? The courtroom was a charged, suffocating space where Benjamin's fate would be decided, a theater of law wielded in service of control. The trial laid bare the plantation's grim machinery, a cold spectacle where justice was shackled to the system's need to quash rebellion. Benjamin stood silent but defiant, his eyes steady beneath the weight of accusation and expectation. His hands bore the calluses of labor and the tremors of fight, his breath measured amid the crowd's murmur. The sickle lay nearby, an unspoken emblem of revolt and consequence. Would justice be served, or would the law serve only to erase his humanity? Witnesses from both sides told fractured stories, their voices laced with fear, anger, or denial. Plantation overseers spoke of shattered order and broken peace, their accounts sharpened by self-preserving urgency. Enslaved people whispered truths that flickered between resistance and survival, their words carefully measured to evade deadly reprisal. The court was less a place of fairness than a battleground for narratives, a contest between the oppressor's claim to order and the enslaved's claim to freedom. The sickle's curved blade was an unyielding witness amid these conflicting truths. How could a system built on subjugation deny the force of a man's desperate act? Legal proceedings unfolded with ritual harshness, the gavel's echo sealing claims before full truths could emerge. Laws crafted to regulate and punish slave behavior were invoked with cold precision. Mercy was a foreign concept. Benjamin's defense was minimal, his voice scarcely heard above the stern declarations of lawmen and property owners. The trial underscored a moral fracture where law met suppressed humanity. Justice became a tool of erasure rather than reckoning. Through it all, Benjamin's gaze held steady, a quiet rebuke to the stage-crafted verdict awaiting him. Would the law acknowledge the weight of his suffering, or simply bury it beneath cold statutes? Outside the courthouse, the plantation simmered with uneasy tension. The revolt and trial sent ripples far beyond the tobacco fields, unsettling the social order while galvanizing fears of further unrest. Stories of Benjamin's defiance spread as both warning and inspiration, threading through the quarters where songs and whispered histories intertwined. Official records sought to minimize the revolt, framing it as isolated violence rather than a manifestation of profound injustice. Yet the sickle's arc had cut deeper than flesh. It severed silence and opened fissures in a facade of control. How would memory choose to hold on to Benjamin's story when history's hand tried to erase it? As the trial closed, a heavy silence descended, broken only by the faint rustle of tobacco leaves outside the courthouse walls. Benjamin's fate was sealed, but his act remained, a painful, incandescent mark against erasure. The harvest moon bore witness still, its fading light a solemn reminder that justice and rebellion are entwined in a dance as old as oppression itself. The sickle lay quietly, a symbol sharpened by sacrifice and the unresolved moral reckoning that history must confront. What future awaited those who dared defy chains, and how long would their stories wait beneath the shadowed fields? The pivotal night of reckoning arrived beneath the harvest moon, when the plantation's hidden fury transformed into a violent crescendo. Benjamin's hand gripped the sickle, a tool that once whispered of harvest and survival, now wielded as a weapon of desperate rebellion. The cold steel swung through the thick tobacco air, striking down 6 overseers one by one. Each blow was swift, purposeful, and born of years of silent anguish. The tobacco leaves rustled with a grim chorus as bodies fell amid shadows stretched long by the moonlight. The sickle's curved blade traced arcs of liberation and loss, severing not only flesh but the iron grip of tyranny. How could a single act of violence echo through generations of silence? As overseers collapsed, panic erupted like a sudden storm caught among the fields. Benjamin and those who stood with him dissolved into the tobacco rows, their footsteps muffled by the rustling leaves and cool night fog. The scent of disturbed earth mingled with the sharp tang of sweat and blood, loading the air with tension. Their flight was urgent and anxious. Each breath came tethered to the hope of escape, yet shadowed by the peril that pursuit would bring. The tobacco fields, both prison and refuge, shifted beneath their hurried passage. What futures lay beyond the claustrophobic rows? Freedom, death, or forgetfulness? Behind the scenes, the plantation's brittle order fractured as leaders grappled with loss and chaos. The sudden deaths tore through their assumptions of control, igniting panic and calls for swift, merciless justice. The sickle's marks were not simply wounds, they were markers of insurrection challenging not only authority, but the very foundations of economic and social power. Neighboring militias were summoned as overseers tightened punishments in a brutal dance of fear and repression. Yet beneath this violent crackdown, the whispers of Benjamin's revolt endured echoes in the quarters, carried on winds over the tobacco fields, a testament to a resistance that law and whip could not fully erase. Would this act become an ember or a flame? In the days after, the plantation's bloodied normality returned, but scars lingered in ragged wounds and haunted memories. The sickle, its blade dulled by the night's fury, rested silent yet potent, a symbol etched into the soil and souls of all who endured. As the harvest moon waned, its pale light folding into dawn, the fields whispered a quiet reckoning that resistance was as persistent as the tobacco's rustle, that repression never quelled the longing for justice. Benjamin's revolt became a shadowed chapter in a history eager to forget, yet impossible to silence. What legacy would this night cultivate beneath the masking green of tobacco leaves? The echoes of the revolt lingered long after the fight had faded into silence. The plantation resumed its grim routine, but beneath the surface, scars marked both land and memory. Tobacco leaves swayed with a restless whisper, as if carrying the silent stories of those who dared to rebel. Life pressed on, yet the shadows of that night stretched over the fields and quarters, haunting the fabric of daily existence. The sickle, once clutched in Benjamin's determined grasp, lay idle, a somber relic of a fractured peace and the price of rebellion. What remnants of courage and pain would the tobacco fields inherit? Survivors bore the weight of loss and fear, their bodies marked by the harsh retribution that inevitably followed. Whippings intensified, punishments multiplied, and entire quarters were gripped by suspicion and dread. The plantation's social order, shaken but unbroken, tightened its noose with laws and violent displays meant to crush further dissent. The sickle's violent arc became a stark warning etched into the collective consciousness, a symbol of resistance met with brutal consequences. Yet beneath the overseer's watchful eyes and the master's stern commands, the spirit of revolt lived on, whispered in secret and guarded fiercely. How did this legacy shape the days and nights that followed? The official record sought to erase and delegitimize Benjamin's act, reducing it to a moment of criminal violence instead of an insurgent plea for justice. Plantation documents, legal proceedings, and local recountings all worked to frame the rebellion as an anomaly, a deviation from the imposed order. But oral histories preserved by the enslaved carried a different truth, one of pain, resilience, and enduring hope. Songs, stories, and memories passed silently beneath the weight of law and threat, defying erasure. The tobacco fields echoed with these hidden voices, a testament to the unyielding quest for freedom. Would future generations learn these whispered truths? The aftermath also rippled outward, sowing seeds of fear across the South's plantation economy. Owners tightened control, reworked slave codes, and increased surveillance, hoping to forestall future uprisings. Yet, every act of repression bore its own contradictions. While crushing revolt, it also revealed the fragility of the social order built on human bondage. The sickle's symbolism transformed, no longer just a tool of labor, it became a clenched fist in the shadowed struggle for liberation. As the tobacco harvest cycles turned, the legacy of Benjamin's revolt persisted, not merely as history, but as a living challenge to the system. What echoes of resistance would the next harvest carry? The harvest moon's glow had long faded when the plantation's daily rhythm cautiously resumed, but the reverberations of Benjamin's revolt echoed deep and wide. The aftermath bore witness to a heightened paranoia among slaveholders, their fears sharpened into harsh new laws and brutal crackdowns. Just as the Nat Turner Rebellion had unleashed waves of violent reprisals and legislative change across the South decades earlier, Benjamin's violent uprising intensified the surveillance and suppression of enslaved communities. Whippings increased, gatherings were banned, and the already tight controls on movement and speech grew suffocating. How could a system so dependent on control survive this renewed tremor of resistance? The sickle, once merely a tool for the harvest's labor, transformed in the collective memory into a symbol of rebellion, a chilling reminder to overseers and enslaved alike of the high cost of resistance. Plantation records sanitized the event, labeling it a criminal act of savagery rather than a fight for liberation. Yet oral histories preserved its spirit, passing Benjamin's story through whispered songs and carefully guarded tales. These narratives became an unyielding thread of resilience amid erasure, defying the plantation's attempts to rewrite the past. Would these stories survive the silence imposed by law and fear? Newly imposed slave codes restricted even the smallest freedoms, bans on education, stringent prohibitions against assembly, and the removal of tools that might serve as weapons or symbols of autonomy. Free Black communities found their rights further curtailed, caught in sweeping crackdowns that sought to isolate and control. As laws hardened, the plantation itself became a fortress of fear, with overseers wielding authority backed by state power and militia reinforcements. The Sickles' legacy as an instrument of both survival and defiance deepened in this climate of relentless repression. What seeds of rebellion remained beneath this tightened soil? Though the visible uprising was quelled, the spirit it ignited endured, an ember carefully guarded amid the tobacco fields and quarters. Benjamin's revolt, like many before and after, stood as a testament to the inexhaustible quest for freedom in the face of brutal oppression. The harvest moon's long and cold shadow extended beyond the fields, a reminder that justice and resistance are forever entwined in history's uneasy dance. In the rustling leaves and whispered legacies, the story of revolt awaited new light, ready to challenge the silence once again.